Net neutrality is not about free speech. It's about something called peering via the Border Gateway Protocol. Now, peering is a direct connection between two what's called autonomous systems without using necessarily the internet, right? So when they say they care about the free and open internet, they're actually arguing for a kind of access that bypasses common internet routes. They want to force ISPs at given data centers to give them a special lane into their network architecture so that they don't have to use the same lane as everybody else on the internet. You're never going to have, like, I don't know a single site that's a political blog or anything, right? And that's what they're trying to say. Oh, your political content is going to be censored if ISPs are. No. Nobody in this community is announcing BGP routes, with the exception of, and historically Daily Stormer's done it on IPv6 for a very brief period. But nobody's generally doing BGP announcements. Like that's not something that's happening, right? So the assertion that something that's about, or an argument that's about the routing layer has anything to do with free speech is just not true, right? It's about a bandwidth bill. That's all that it's about, is that these people want the ability to push unlimited amounts of streaming video at no cost to themselves on other people's networks. And that's all that it's about, is that they want Comcast to carry unlimited 4K streaming video, regardless of the cost that it will have to take for Comcast to upgrade their network to that capacity, right? And the thing about net neutrality and the way that they're arguing it is that it assumes the internet is a fungible commodity, right? That 1 megabit is 1 megabit everywhere. The internet is still very young and still being shaped. There's a huge requirement for a lot more innovation in regards to the internet. You can cite some of the low latency internet access providers that do specialty transit, like, the one that comes to mind was Windy Apple Technologies a few years ago. They made low latency radios entirely in FPGA and ASIC, and they did this to shave like a fraction of a millisecond off of their transit, because they wanted the lowest latency possible. And there would be not a lot of bandwidth, these are radios, these are microwaves, but as it turns out, there's a need for high frequency traders between Chicago and New York to have these very low latency internet connections. And when you run over the normal internet, right, it's like converted from copper to fiber, copper to fiber, copper to fiber a bunch of times. There's the refractory index of all the glass. Like, it adds up over time, and it turns out that shooting microwave radio straight from Chicago to New York, where you get a direct path, is takes less time in terms of milliseconds than, and you have very small messages in going these HFTs, these big funds, right? They're sending, they're asking about the price of a given stock or commodity. They don't need a lot of bandwidth. So point being is that there's a lot going on right now. People are doing new things with the internet to the limit of physics. To the limit of physics, people are doing new and unique things with the internet. And part of Title II with the FCC actually gives the FCC veto. It gives them veto over pricing schemes, which actually discourages competition. A huge part of the rhetoric as well, coming from Google and Facebook, is highly disingenuous, and that they're claiming that, Comcast is this big monopoly, that net neutrality will ensure that they have to play by the rules. And what it's really going to do is make sure Comcast never has another competitor ever, because what's worse to market competition than a government authority getting arbitrary veto on new market entrants, right? It's like all the years ago, there was something called a competitive local exchange carrier. There still is. It was this thing that tried to give competition to the incumbent local exchange carriers, the big telecom companies. By and large, most of the CLECs were just bought up years later by the ILECs. It was just a It was a thing, a stupid compromise that didn't actually increase competition, right? The thing that actually makes for a lack of competition is already regulation, is that Comcast will go to a municipality and they'll get an exclusive right in exchange for agreeing to lay fiber or copper in that municipality. They'll get an agreement over the span of years where nobody else gets to do the same thing. So the reason that Comcast has very little competition is already government regulations. And nobody's arguing. Google and Facebook and Twitter and Reddit and Netflix, they are not arguing for that monopoly to be dissolved, which is the primary obstacle to market choice in this arena. So they are not arguing for you to have more choice in internet service providers. They definitely aren't arguing for free speech on the internet. And if they were, there were a lot of things that they could do before net neutrality. They simply want to pay less money for bandwidth. And that, the idea that they're trying to push government legislation, right? Significant government legislation that will reduce your choice in the market for a very, very, very long time, that will destroy your ability as a consumer to select a new internet service provider. They're more than happy to do that. And the fact that they're doing that to pay nickels less on, megabits per second is just fucking criminal. Like, fuck these people and fuck net neutrality. You should be opposed to it. It's a scam. It's a lie. It's not about the free and open internet. It never was, and it never will be. If you want legislation about internet freedom, you need specific legislation about internet freedom, and it has to specifically enshrine political speech across all internet services. It has to have mandatory 7-figure penalties for the victims and time-bounded increased penalties for periods of non-compliance. You need that. It doesn't exist. If you want to lobby for the free speech on the internet, lobby for that, but do not lobby in the interest of the most censorious, scheming, oppressive parties in terms of free speech on the open internet. These people are criminals, they are liars, they are schemers, and they have no interest in the free and open internet.